So we're missing Bessie. Does anyone know where she is? Otherwise, we can get started with presentations beforehand, and we'll get started with the Q&A. Yeah. Cool. All right. So, good morning, afternoon, good night to, depending on where you're connecting from. Good afternoon, I think, here in the room. Thank you for being here with us today. Welcome, everyone, again. So this is the People and Household Track, Shock Responsive Social Protection. I'm Alejandro Valencia. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management and Organizational Learning Advisor for the Resilience and Food Security Bureau at USAID. And we're ready to get started. We're really happy to have all of you here. This session will be mainly on how government and other stakeholders are generating and using evidence and the role of shock responsive social protection and associated financing mechanisms to inform that decision making. So we have a nice mixture of private, public sector contributors today. We have here, is this still on? Okay. Dr. Stephen Debvro from the Institute of Development Studies. We have Bessie Mzuza, and Paul is connected. Paul Chipeta is connected as well for the government of Zambia today. We have Mohamed Al-Menfi from the World Bank connected online. Thanks for being here. We have Lorraine Enyue, who's here with us. Thanks for being here. And again, reminder to all the presenters, we're going to have about 10 minutes per presentation. I'm going to be that bad guy that's going to keep the time, so make sure you stay in time, because at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session of about 20 minutes, and we want to get some of those questions in. So start thinking of what you want to ask, so we're going to be passing those mics on. All right. With that, we'll get us started. Dr. Stephen, go ahead. And then here's your clicker. The clicker works? Yeah. Okay. Can we get to the presentations?
Thanks very much, and greetings, everybody. Let's see if this works. Okay, just give it a moment. There we go. So I'm going to be talking about shock responsive social protection for resilience, a big topic for 10 minutes, but we'll see what we do, how we go. So social protection has got two main pillars, and then there are others that people add, but the two main ones, foundational, are, oh dear, the formatting's gone weird, social assistance and social insurance. Okay, so social assistance is basically transfers to people, usually cash or food or vouchers. And social assistance is a way of building household or individual assets, right? So using the livelihoods framework, sustainable livelihoods framework, we have 5 types of capitals that get improved through various types of transfers. For example, school feeding, which keeps kids in school, builds their human capital, nutrition, education. And similarly, or conversely, so what happens in this diagram is that you're getting access to social assistance increases your stock of assets, and that's a way of building resilience all by itself. The second mechanism is social insurance, and social insurance protects you against shocks. So again, using the same 5 capitals, you can see that, for example, in the previous session, we had a discussion about index-based livestock insurance. That protects natural capital. If you don't have insurance against shocks, your capitals have a risk of shrinking back towards the middle of the diagram. In other words, you lose everything, you become destitute. So resilience can be achieved either by increasing household assets through social assistance, and of course other mechanisms, and then can be protected against losses or shocks through social insurance. Okay. But what's important also is the systems which are delivering social protection. So a system is more than just a program, right? A cash transfer or a school feeding program or a public works program is just a project. But a system which delivers transfers predictably on time to everybody who needs it with dignity, etc. That's what you need to build resilience. So what I'm saying in this diagram is that systems include programs which need to be adequate, delivery of transfers need to be adequate and have good coverage of all who need it. Policies need to be in place, policies and legislation need to be in place, but also the delivery systems need to be in place. The registration, the payments, the beneficiary management or information systems need to be there as well. And that's important for shock response. So you need to look at these questions. Does the support provided through social protection reach everyone who needs it? Is it enough? Is it guaranteed, or is it ad hoc? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then I argue that social protection will not build household resilience. It'll keep you alive, but it won't build your resilience. Let's take a case study, which is Bangladesh, COVID-19. I'm waiting. We're all waiting. Okay, we went too far. Sorry, can we go back? We're going back. So we did some work, that's fine. We did some work in Bangladesh and we looked at informal workers in urban areas, and we found that pavement dwellers and slum dwellers. And we found that when the government imposed all these standard lockdown measures, which happened all across the world, of course this had the immediate effect of cutting off people's source of income, employment and livelihoods. And those who suffered worse were those who didn't manage to work at home like most of us did, with salaries that continued during lockdowns. They were people that were uninsured, they had no access to social insurance, they couldn't carry on working and get the salary, so they were in effect put on unemployment. They were made unemployed. And because the government had done this to them, the government also had to provide some kind of social protection to keep them alive. Otherwise, people would literally be sitting at home and starving. No income, no food, no social protection. Can we please go to the next slide? This gets added to my time, by the way. I hope you're counting. Way too far. Okay, you can leave it there. That's fine. That's fine. So we did a survey in Bangladesh, and we found that in Dhaka and Chattogram, and we found that the number of days that people working obviously crashed from a full month's work, 22, 25 days a month of work, down to very close to zero during lockdowns. And we found that average income also, of course, crashed. So among these people that were informal workers mostly, crashed to pretty much zero, especially for women who weren't willing to break down lockdown regulations. Some men did, and they made a little bit of income, but essentially everybody's income crashed very close to zero. Okay, and people said, I can't buy enough food for my family, and of course in the early months they got no help from government. Later on that changed, but it came a bit late. So the governments responded across the world in many different ways, and some of these ways are what we call shock responsive social protection. The first mechanism is to increase the payments to existing program beneficiaries. So you have a program where people are getting pensions or child support grant or some kind of informal social insurance, and you simply pay them a bit more while they have to sit at home unable to work. And that keeps them going because they get enough to survive on. Horizontal shock response is where you increase the number of beneficiaries on the program. And that was also done in many countries. And that depends very much on your ability to quickly register and pay people who are coming into these systems, who aren't on the system initially, but during lockdowns they were added to the system. And so those two mechanisms were very important as a way of expanding coverage and adequacy of payments to people that needed to survive lockdowns. Now, did these programs reach everybody who needed it? No, they were important, but they didn't reach everybody. Was it enough? No, it wasn't enough. It was usually inadequate. Again, kept people alive, but not much more than that. Was it guaranteed? No, it was ad hoc. It was a government reaction to a crisis. There was no way that people had a right to claim these benefits. They were lucky if they got them. So I'm making a slightly controversial point here, which is that I think shock responsive social protection is great, and many countries are now investing in building their shock responsiveness of their social protection systems as a result of learning from COVID, but it's not enough on its own. It will support survival, not resilience. The important learning is actually to build the systems. Having those systems in place, the architecture for registering and for paying people is probably more important than the actual programs themselves. Once you have that architecture in place, you have flex capacity, you can easily scale up, and you can also make it a little bit more claims-based or rights-based. So I want to make a separate argument here, which is a point about people's right to claim social protection. If you see social protection as a right, then shock response should be automatic. When you need help, you should be able to claim it. And if you think about unemployment insurance or pensions that we are paying to pension funds, social security funds, that's also in effect rights-based or claims-based. We have a right to claim what we have put into. Poor people don't have that right. So when you have social assistance, you're lucky if you get it. And the social protection floor idea is about making that a guarantee. Everybody should have a right to an adequate level of, let's say, survival or subsistence income. So my basic argument here is that shock responsive social protection plus a guaranteed income floor equals resilience. And to have that, you need to have a system and an architecture in place, which has been built in many countries as a result of COVID, so we're getting there. But the right to social protection is still not there in most countries. So let me close by conceptualizing this idea of resilience requiring both people to be resilient and systems to be resilient. So let's start out pre-interventions. You have, like pre-COVID, for example, in many countries you had people with low assets, no access to social protection, weak social services, weak food systems. You can strengthen individual resilience, as I showed in those spider diagrams, by providing social assistance, which increases household and individual assets, and by putting in place social insurance, which is a safety net against shocks, protects your assets against losses, okay? That strengthens individual resilience, but within the framework of systems which are able to deliver that social assistance and social insurance. So you need to also strengthen systems in parallel, okay? Social protection systems need to be well-functioning and comprehensive. Food systems also need to be integrated, robust, and equitable, and probably also other systems like disaster risk reduction, risk management needs to be effective. And if you do that, if you strengthen individual resilience and strengthen systems, you will end up with this desirable outcome, which is high resilience. People that are protected against shocks, they have adequate assets, they are able to access social assistance and insurance when they need it. When shocks happen, they can access social services, and food systems are robust and equitable. Okay. That's my theory. This is very conceptual. We're going to have some more practical, empirical people coming with evidence. But before I end, or as I end, I just want to mention a new publication, which is this book, which just happens to have come out recently, called Resilience and Food Security in a Food Systems Context. There are flyers here if you want to get the book. And by the way, it's open access, so it's free at the point of delivery, like social protection should be. Okay, thanks very much.
So, Bessie? Thank you. No, Mohammed. So we should be Mohammed. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
They changed it. Apologies, everyone. So Mohammed is actually you. Can we go back 2 clicks? And can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, awesome. Yeah, you ready to go?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, everyone. I would like to, Dr. Stephen gave us a good framework on understanding social protection theories and pathways to support citizens to resilience. I would like to give you a snapshot on what happened during COVID and the current crisis in terms of social protection responses. So can you move to the next slide, please? So here we see the number of social protection measures since the beginning of COVID, March 2020. And we believe this is the largest scale up in the history of social protection globally, with almost 4,000 measures have been announced, either new or adaptation to existing programs in more than 200 economies, countries, and territories since the beginning of pandemic. And the type of measures spans from social assistance, social insurance, and also labor market policies, focusing on the supply side, meaning kind of supporting beneficiaries through training and job research assistance. But also from crisis to another, we see also a spike and an increase in the response to the price shock currently initiated primarily from the current war in Ukraine, and we see more than 1,000 program or measures been announced, either new or existing. The structure of the response between the two different crises is important to distinguish, and which is something I will highlight more in the upcoming slides. Next, please. So again, it's a historic scale up in a way that in the number of people reached. And during COVID, we have more than 1 billion people have been supported, actual received transfers during the pandemic, the 2 year. This is an accumulative, and it's assuming that one beneficiary receiving at least one benefit during the 2 years. During the price shock, we believe almost a billion people have received any type of support, social protection support, either through cash transfer, social insurance, labor market, but also subsidy, which was a key feature of the current crisis. Can we move to the next, please? Now, looking at the coverage of COVID pandemic in terms of social protection, and we have here 3 graphs that shows us the coverage in terms of absolute number, coverage in terms of share population, and coverage across the income group. And on the left one, we see the top 10 programs in terms of coverage of absolute number. And we see India, where there's a program that paid 200 million women through their through their bank accounts directly for 3 months and supporting them into during the pandemic. We have also the United States stimulus check, which got on to more than 150 million people. We have also Japan, which is almost a universal social cash transfer, one-off cash transfer, Pakistan as well, and we have China. And we can see here, these are the kind of big countries in terms of population, and this is why kind of they take up most of the absolute coverage. Moving to the coverage as share of population, we see a different picture here, where there are multiple countries that they announce one-off universal basic income supporting, and we counted more than 10 that we counted that they reach out to all adult citizens within the country. And Timor-Leste, South Korea, Jersey, Taiwan, and we have Israel, almost universal as well, Japan. And the reason why, like all of these are kind of universal, but the reason why they're not 100% is because of the actual, and not everyone kind of apply for some of the cases. However, when we look at the coverage across the income group, we see an alarming and a call for action, actually, where the lowest in terms of coverage per region is the low income countries, whereas the highest is kind of high income countries. And this kind of disparity in coverage, it's a call of actions and how we can address and close this gap in terms of coverage among different income groups. Next, please. Here, this graph just shows one of the, Dr. Stephen talked about systems and programs, and what we noticed here that during COVID, that a vast majority of programs were a new one, whereas there are quite a number of building and adapting existing ones, but the vast majority were new programs, new systems, targeting either new people or targeting existing people, but with a existing social protection beneficiary, but with a different systems. And that is kind of also kind of an idea where building systems are COVID and has initiated a lot of system building, which I will mention a couple of country examples that such as Togo and DRC, where they built system for the first time in terms of social protection during pandemic. So pandemic was kind of an impetus for system building for many, many countries. Next, please. Despite the large coverage of more than 1 billion people supported during COVID, the duration was not enough. And here we see an average duration of 4.5 months in terms of cash transfer support, whereas the pandemic lasted more than 2 years, and an average stringency where lockdowns is more than 6 months in globally. And that is kind of shows that despite the coverage was large, the duration was short. And this is, I think, an inherent trade-off within social protection sector, where how to balance between coverage and adequacy and a duration given the fiscal constraints and limited resources. However, what we noticed also that there was a lot of new programs were mentioned at the beginning, but then extension. So the 4.5 months is the initial duration announced during pandemic. But what we see also, we saw a large wave of extensions of the programs that were what most of countries, what they did is they announced program at the beginning, and then they kept, because of the uncertainty with the pandemic, they kept extending this program. Actually, for some countries, more than one time, the extension was announced. Next, please. Looking now at the timeliness of the response, and here what we did is that we calculated the number of days between the announcement of the program and the first payment that were made for a program. And we see a large variation among different regions, ranging from 14 days in South Asia to 40 days in Sub-Saharan Africa, with an average of 26 days. But deconstructing this and delving deeper into the type of expansion, whether it's through vertical or horizontal within the existing program, we see vertical expansion is faster. And what do we mean by vertical expansion? By you have an existing beneficiaries and you increase the benefit level, or you top up or rate up the benefit level for the existing ones. And this is usually, it's an easier task because you already have the beneficiary, they are identified, they're receiving the benefit. You just increase the generosity of the benefit. Whereas for horizontal expansion, meaning kind of you need to add the caseload, add more people into a program, and we see that taking a larger, like a slower response rate because of the complications and like how do you identify who's eligible, who's not eligible, and the complications of all of that. So we see building vertical expansion was faster and more timely in most of the cases we looked at. Next, please. And spending here, I'd like to go quickly, but we see an average spending of 2% of GDP in 187 economies across the globe. And that is 0.5% more than the pre-pandemic situation. And we have Aspire data indicating 1.5% average global average on spending on social protection programs. However, when we compare this with the response to the Great Recession, comparing to the same we see during the Great Recession, or we have less than $1 trillion, 653 actually $million when spent during the Great Recession social protection response, whereas during the pandemic we're talking about the $3 trillion, but with the caveat that most of that is from high income countries, not from low income countries. Next, please. Now, select a couple of country insights that I would like to highlight. We're not going to go in details. I'm happy to take them in the Q&A, but just to give you an overview. Next, please. So we see three or like almost 6 extensions happening during COVID, and if we can group them, there are increasing more people, such as South Africa, our 350 program, where they added more informal sector workers into the program and expanded the program horizontally. We see countries that increased the expansion to more places, such as informal settlements in DRC, and the Concession program that relied on mobile, on satellite imagery and mobile phone to reach out to the informal settlement. We see also programs connecting with other sectors, such as what happened in Morocco, where the support was to the health, the non-contributory health insurance scheme. They were supported and they were identified and supported during COVID. More data has been used, and then Togo, the Nfusi program that has been a big bank in Africa, and how Nfusi, Togo, and within 10 days managed to deliver a benefit, despite that no system existed before that. And then we see also expansion in digital, and how particularly in public works, where new innovation in digital public works relying on hiring people to do some digital work and give them cash. So it's kind of cash for work, but digital one. And then we see also increase of approaches of financing, and we'll have Loren later talking more about this, but like kind of what the risk financing layering that was adapted in Sierra Leone after the Ebola and the flooding crisis that happened in the past 10 years. Next, please. Now moving on a few, like one important study on evidence and also kind of what we draw from the COVID response. So next, please. Definitely the response to COVID, and here this is a nice paper on the kind of understanding the impact of poverty, response on poverty across many countries and across income groups. And we see here the orange dot where if in the scenario where there is no mitigation, and where would be the poverty line, and the blue one is that the poverty line after the percentage change in poverty line after announcing the mitigation or providing social protection response. And the vertical line is the zero. And despite that, not all countries reach out to the zero, where like they manage to offset all the challenges or the impact on poverty. But definitely without social protection, situation could have been worse in many countries. And as we see here in the blue line going to the left, and that's kind of taken from impact evaluation studies and across multiple countries, and shows the kind of yes, it was useful. It did not offset completely, but the situation without it would have been in a worse situation. Next, please.
Mohammed, we're going to have to ask you to get wrapped up.
Sure. Absolutely. Can we move next, please? I want to conclude at this time. Thank you. Another one, please. Next. Yes, is it déjà vu here? Just quickly, I want to highlight that what we noticed now during COVID was more cash social assistance focused response. During price shock, we see the rise of subsidies. And we see the rise of subsidies across the region, except for North America, but across the region, we see subsidies been the largest share of the response. And that's something we did not see during COVID. So that's kind of also an alarming thing. Next, please. Next. And then finally, takeaways. Pandemic response in a nutshell. This is historic. This is the largest in history. And I think a lot of lessons can be learned and a lot of the systems that can we build on. However, it was uneven in terms of coverage, and as we showed, but also humbling and kind of trying to make us think more about what is universal social protection, how do we get there, how do we support countries in reaching that goal. Final slide, next please. And finally, some of the challenges that loom ahead. We need to increase coverage. And how can we do that? And how can we deal with the subsidy resurgence? And also we need also to think about the adaptiveness and how we incorporate more automatic stabilizers so we can mobilize funds, systems in case of crisis hits, humanitarian linkages, and how can we link what the humanitarian systems are doing with to strengthen national programs, and thinking of fiscal sustainability. And that's a big topic that we all should think about. And finally, we need to make sure that we benchmark simplicity in designing our programs to make sure that they're responsive but also efficient. With that, thank you so much, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. To move things along, we're going to invite Bessie over from the government of Zambia. Please go ahead.
Actually, it's Malawi, not Zambia. I don't know. Okay, so back. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about generating and using evidence on the role of shock responsive social protection based on Malawi experience. So that's the background. You might be aware that we are about 20 million, and the 85% of the 20 million lives in the rural but 50.7% of Malawians are poor, and 20.5% they are ultra poor who needs social assistance. But looking at the frequency of the shocks, in 2019, we had Cyclone Idai, 2021, 22, Cyclone Anna, and Cyclone Gombe, just recently, Cyclone Freddy. So what we've been doing in terms of generating evidence and also contribution to building resilience, we are talking about these social protection instruments. Our professor has already talked about them. We have the prevention part of it, the protection part of it, promotion part of it. Those are the tools for social protection. So we are talking about prevention, increasing the absorptive capacity during shocks. So that's what we are doing in Malawi. In terms of protection, we are building anticipatory capacity to reduce the impact of the climate variability. When it comes, how do we reduce it? That's what we are doing. But we are also building adaptive capacity in the long term through sustainable livelihoods promotion. So, yeah, okay. So what evidence exists in Malawi? So there are so many studies. We've been implementing the social cash transfer program and the public works program for several years. The social cash transfer started in 2006, but based on evidence, we have scaled it to all the 28 districts. In 2006, we only started with one district, and then we have scaled it up to all the 28 districts. So we have the impact evaluation in terms of the cash transfers, what they are doing in terms of building resilience. So we also have, we had a project with the Food and Agriculture Organization. It was called Protection to Production. It provided evidence in terms of the multiplier effect of the social cash transfer program. So based on this evidence, we've been targeting the beneficiaries in terms of looking at the poverty levels. So the social cash transfer program is targeting 10% of the ultra poor without labor, and then the next 15% is being targeted by the Climate Smart Public Works program, but based on evidence. But based on evidence, along the implementation line, we have seen that maybe poverty targeting is not doing us any justice, because we have a lot of inclusion and exclusion errors. So we want to move out of the only poverty targeting, but putting an additional layer in terms of the targeting. So we want to move from the poverty targeting to categorical targeting, but of course using the poverty as a benchmark. That's the social cash transfer program. Based on evidence, it has, we have seen that the regularity and predictability of that program is giving resilience to all the participants of that program. It's smoothening consumption. As you know, that's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You have to deal with the needs of the people first. So it's food first. If somebody is hungry, that one, a hungry man is an angry man. You cannot talk of anything to build resilience if you can't address the food needs. So the social cash transfer program builds resilience in terms of the consumption support. So in terms of the stabilizing the financial security, we are talking about, because they are organized in savings and loans groups, so we are encouraging them into savings. So building that financial asset, it's about financial inclusion. But in terms of the enrollment of school children, we are trying to build human capital. So we have a school bonus attached to the cash transfer program. So every school-going child, primarily it's about $1, and secondary it's about $2. So we're trying to build human capital so that maybe they can find good jobs when they are educated. And in terms of coping mechanism, the beneficiaries avoid the negative coping mechanism when a shock hits. In terms of the ad hoc support. We are talking about the vertical expansion and the horizontal expansion. Professor has already talked about it. When a shock comes, we add on the transfer values because they are not adequate at the moment. And we also, because we know that when a shock comes, most people are hit, not only those on the social assistance. So we are talking about the vertical and the horizontal expansion in terms of the social cash transfer program. In terms of the public works program, we have moved away from the usual infrastructure type of public works program. Now we have adopted a climate smart enhanced public works program, looking at the catchment management, because we want to deal with the causes of food insecurity in Malawi. So we want to looking at the soil and water conservation structures and then reducing the soil loss so that at the end of the day, we reduce the food insecurity in Malawi. We build in the soil conservation structures. We have the water table high. Women will not travel long distances because water will be found nearby, and the soil and the waters are nearby. You can do irrigation and so on and so forth. So we are dealing with the food security in terms of the public works program. So those are the structures. You can see that's a stone band trying to reclaim a gully over there so that we reduce the runoff, and then we have more water down the communities so that they can also catch in terms of the ponds. And the social cash transfer beneficiaries and the public works program beneficiaries, we give them additional interventions. We mobilize them into savings and loans groups where we now concentrate on the financial literacy programs, giving them seed capital, giving them mobilizing them in terms of the assets. So that's what we do, because the transfers, we realize that the transfers which we give them are not enough. And if you want to build resilience, these are the other interventions, the nutrition interventions, the financial interventions, everything in terms of now linking them to the social sectors as well. So those are the other interventions which we give to our beneficiaries of social cash transfer and public works program beneficiaries. In terms of the anticipatory building resilience, we have aligned the humanitarian and disaster response with the existing social protection programs through the mechanism which we have placed in place. So in Malawi, over the years, we have seen that between November and January, we call it the lean season, because most of the households are short of food insecurity. So year in, year out, that's the slow onset of the shocks. We give them additional support to these beneficiaries. So what we have done under the World Bank program, we have incorporated a SEC, the SEC component. Okay. So what we do is, after the president declaring a disaster, we can now activate the SEC, rearranging. It's a zero component, but after a shock, we can always reprogram the resources and respond to that shock. But we have also recently procured a risk financing insurance with the ARC capacity. We have also built a scalable mechanism under the social cash transfer program, looking at the drought. So this one is a scalable mechanism, and even the insurance itself is linked to drought. So we want to build resilience, anticipatory resilience when a shock comes. So when a drought is triggered, because we have triggers which we have developed with our colleagues from Department of Climate Change. So when it's triggered, the social cash transfer program is expanded vertically and horizontally. So in terms of building the systems, the professor has also talked about those. We cannot respond quickly if the systems are not in place. So we have the Unified Beneficiary Registry. It's not a beneficiary as the name sounds, it's a social registry. It's just a database of all the names and social characteristics of all the communities in Malawi. So each and every program which comes takes their beneficiaries from this social registry. So for social cash transfer, it's about 10%, and then the public works, the 15%. But we have also invested in the payment systems. We saw during the COVID-19 response, because most of the districts were paying manual, and with those restricted movements, we could not pay our beneficiaries. So we have invested more in terms of the electronic payments. So most of the districts now are under electronic payments. It's flexible even in the challenging environment. And in terms of the coordination, the humanitarian cluster and the social protection cluster, we are almost working together, because we've realized that we are looking at the same beneficiaries, the same communities in the same geographical space. When it comes year in, year round, we're talking about social protection. But when it comes to the disasters, whether natural or man-made, we are talking about the humanitarian response. But they are the same beneficiaries, because we are saying the poor are the most hit when a disaster comes. So we are working together with the humanitarian sector. So we have a pillar working group, and we are also, the social protection is also part of the protection and the social support in terms of the humanitarian country team. So thank you so much. That's the evidence from Malawi.
And lastly, Lorraine.
Thank you, Bessie. It's interesting that I come after her, because we've literally just finalized the Malawi parametric insurance product. So I'm briefly going to talk about disaster risk financing. We're going to talk about how risk clearing works, and then we're going to go into how our parametric product works, and hopefully I do all of that in 10 minutes. So wish me luck. If I skip something, please do come find me. I'm going to try and run it over quickly. So I'm going to just go briefly about who the Africa Risk Capacity is, because we are the largest providers of parametric insurance. We are a AU specialized agency, and we are organized into a catastrophe risk pool. And when we say a risk pool, we mean that every year we invite different countries to join the pool. So we don't have a static set of clients. There are only 3 risk pools in the world, 4 risk pools in the world. There's one from Southeast Asia that has flood. There's one for Caribbean, and there's one for the Pacific. I just thought I should bring that there are only 4 risk pools in the world. So it's quite a unique offering. So far, we've been able to pay 167 million to over 20 countries that we've been working with in Africa. We've received about 156 million premium. That just goes to show that we are paying out more than we are receiving. So we do have a lot of donor support. So we fall largely into the public and developmental part of this parametric offering. Just more on what we do specifically and how we provide this risk insurance. The first thing we do is we do a client risk assessment, where we assess the risk. We do it through various mechanisms that we already have in place. We do have a model that we use called Africa Risk View that is specific for drought. We have employed other agencies to come and support our climate risk assessment for tropical cyclone and also for flood. We also do have an outbreaks and epidemic. This was not the final version of the slide, but we also do have an outbreak and epidemic product that covers 4 different viruses. There's Marburg, there's Ebola, there's Lassa fever, and there's one more. We also do disaster risk financing. I will talk about the products, instruments that we have under this. We also support contingency planning, premium financing solutions, and this is very important because countries and governments have very large competing priorities when it comes to paying out premiums. So we do facilitate conversations between countries and donors to provide premium financing so that they're able to take out insurance. And then we also do capacity building programs. So I'm just going to go directly into disaster risk financing. And basically, at ARC, we're trying to look at it from a risk layering perspective. And what we're trying to say from this risk layering perspective is that the current disaster risk is very large for one instrument to cover all the risks. So what we are trying to do, we're trying to assimilate and optimize which are the risks that a country can take, which are the risks that can be shared, and which are the risks that can be transferred. Because we do know that once you take out insurance, transferring all of your risks to an insurance will lead to a very large premium. And if all the money is going into premium, it means that you don't have anything to sort of hold the risk that will retain, because we do know that with insurance, you still will retain a certain portion of the risk. So we're trying to look at it in these three different ways. We're trying to encourage governments to determine what are the budgetary instruments, what are the things that they can do with the risk that is left to them, what are the contingency funding instruments that they can look into so that they can be able to provide liquidity, how can they set this money aside, and what are the instruments that they can transfer for a premium in exchange for risk transfer in insurance. So we're trying to layer it that way so that we can provide maximum coverage for the risk, and also we can bring in more instruments, and this makes it cost effective for the whole chain. So when we look at how we are risk layering at ARC, our primary tool is a parametric insurance product, which I will talk about, and we offer this for drought, flood, tropical cyclone, and also for outbreaks and epidemics. And below that, because we do know that insurance it won't cover all the risks. So there's always an attachment point, which is the starting point at where the insurance policy will start to pay out. So below the attachment point, there's always that risk that remains with the government. So now we're trying to organize it in such a way that the government can have a contingency fund that will pay out if the risk does not hit the attachment layer. So that's what we're calling the ARC contingency fund. And above that, over and above the parametric product, we're trying to provide for very, very large catastrophic risks in form of a CAT bond. So this will also function similarly to how the risk transfer works, but it will be for extremely severe risks. So I'm going to go into detail now just about the ARC parametric product, because this is where 90% of our business, our revenues are coming from, and this is the main tool that we provide to governments. So we do start with the rainfall data set, because drought, we want to see by how much or by how little there's deficiency in the moisture and in the atmosphere, and we organize this deficiency into what we call an index, and the index will be based on various factors such as the precipitation, temperature, such as the crop, such as the season. So you organize that into an index, and this index is what we'll use to trigger either the drought or determine that there's no drought if the trigger is not reached. And then we try and identify the populations that will be most vulnerably affected, and this will just be based on historical data. Which are the countries, which are the counties that have had the largest vulnerability profile, who are the people who are going to be most affected by drought, and we try to focus any vulnerability or any hazard functions around this population. Using these two information, the index, the deficiency, the population affected, we do try to determine an average cost for the drought. How much would it cost to restore resilience? I do not want to overuse that word. How much would it cost to support someone during that period where there's a drought? And then using that average cost per person, we multiply this by all the vulnerable population, and we do have a model response cost. That is how we determine the cost of drought. That's how we determine how much we base the insurance. Using this cost of insurance, we can now help the government delve into the risk transfer layers. What part of the risk will you try to retain? What part of the risk do you want to transfer out? And what part of the risk is above you that we feel like we can go to the capital markets and provide a CAT bond for? And post-triggering, if there is a drought, we help them also do a contingency fund planning in advance, where they can now plan the implementation. Who will they target? How will they do it? Will it be cash transfer? Will they be providing for food? Will they be going out and maybe doing farmer schemes, literacy, and all these mechanisms will fall into the contingency planning. So that's how we really run our parametric tool, parametric insurance product, and it's similar for tropical cyclone, it's similar for flood, and it's similar to how we run the outbreak and epidemics tool. So I'm also just going to talk about the contingency fund. Like we said, it covers perils below, and this is just a contribution-based mechanism where we encourage countries to set aside money in advance so that it can provide for liquidity once there's a drought event. And then we are also now piloting a cat bond where we're going to provide for extremely high severity events, which we've started to see in the first couple of years. We're piloting with one of our clients, so I don't think I can talk about it more. But basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to see by how much can we reduce the cost of insurance by cutting that cost in half and passing it on to the capital markets. So thank you so much, and I'll be around if you have any questions.
All right, thank you very much. So that concludes the presentations. We know we're a little bit over time, but we did start over time, so we're going to give it about 10 more minutes for questions coming from you guys. We have people here helping us with the microphones, so just raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and we have the microphones over here too. Oh, and I would like to also ask Paul to come up here to respond to questions. Yes, in back. Christine.
Hi, I have a comment and a question for Bessie. It's really incredible to see the very comprehensive approach that the government of Malawi has taken to, to social protection. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit with us on how you built interest and if you had any key champions across certain ministries within the government of Malawi.
Yeah, did I hear you right? Key champions? Yes. In terms of?
What are some of the key, or who are some of the key champions within the government of Malawi and really bringing this approach to life?
Yeah, in Malawi, I belong to the Poverty and the Social Protection Division. It's under the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. Our role is mainly to coordinate all actors in terms of social protection. So we don't implement, but we give policy guidance, we develop the strategies, we mobilize resources, but there are sectors which implement these instruments. So for the social cash transfer program is implemented by Ministry of Gender and Social Welfare. For the public works is implemented by our colleagues under National Local Government Finance Committee in coordination with the local government ministry. In terms of the cash plus interventions, UNICEF is supporting us. World Food Program is also supporting us. But we also have a sister organization under the National Local Government Finance Committee, which is a COMSIP, Community Savings, and I've forgotten the other part. But they do mainly the cash plus interventions. So because there is a coordinating ministry, the coordinating department, that's the motivation. And also because, as I said, 21.5% are ultra-poor. And year in, year out, the slow onset of the shocks, what we're talking about, the lean season, every year in, year out, and for your information, like last year, we had 3.8 million households which needed assistance. And then if we don't build resilience to these people, it means year in, year out, we'll be supporting them with these interventions. But what we want to do is to build resilience so that we minimize this year in, year out in terms of support. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from around the room?
Yeah, just following up on this. You mentioned that you work under the Ministry of Finance, but also the other ministry fund social protection in times of crisis. But I think, I mean, my question remains in the sense that so we need to build resilience from the ground up at I think at the household level, because we need to empower them to be self-sufficient in case of shocks. While I think social protection, the ingredients of social protection is that somebody else intervenes, right? In this case, the Minister of Public Finance or UNICEF or WFP or Ministry of Public Works, but how can we do without it? Especially because in the light of the fact that you just mentioned that 3.8 million households haven't received anything during the latest shock.
So as my colleague Bess indicated, at the national level, we have the Social Protection Working Group, which comprises of all sorts of partners. These include, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of Management Affairs, Climate Change, Ministry of Gender, and then there's also like our office, National Local Government Finance Committee, as main financiers that receive resources from the World Bank. But this is at the national level. Within this same kind of setup, we have the social registry, which is being managed by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. But the systems are being handled at local council levels. So all the implementation takes place at the local level, where we have the district councils that are directly responsible for social provision to its constituents. So at any one time at the center, we just provide the policy guideline and the programs within which the transfers would be made. So it's the district commissioners that do the proper coordination of ensuring that the resources reach the intended beneficiaries through the instruments that we've provided at the center. That's how it works. And from the district, we also have lower level structures at what we call village level and community level. And within the district, we have the technical arm, which is the district social support committee that manages all aspects related to social protection. And the same kind of mirror goes for the humanitarian sector interventions. Thank you.
Just to add, remember I mentioned about the Unified Beneficiary Registry. So that's the social registry. When we capture data, socioeconomic characteristics of all the households, we use a proxy means testing now to rank the beneficiaries into their rightful categories. So the 10% based on the vulnerability of that household in that, starting from the local level, starting from the village level to the group village level to the TA level and then to the district level. All the households are ranked based on their vulnerability using the proxy means testing. So as I said, because over the years, during the implementation of these programs, we have seen that now the communities have gotten used to our questions, the questionnaire, and they position themselves now to become vulnerable. So we want to use an additional layer of categorical targeting. Poverty first, and then categorical targeting. We want to target now the elderly. So put a benchmark, whether 50 or 60, you are eligible for a social cash transfer program, child-headed households, those households with the chronic vulnerability. And then, because now be targeting the actual vulnerabilities, will now be looking at integrated social safety net, giving the safety nets in terms of their vulnerability. We cannot give a household which has got labor, but has got no capacity to produce, to give them the subsidies. Can we give them cash transfers? Enough cash transfers, adequate cash transfers, regular cash transfers, so that we build resilience.
I think we have a question here in the middle.
I'll direct this at Mohammed, but it's actually something maybe each of you could respond to, and that's, there's going to be a pushback here on the cost of all of this. It's extraordinarily costly to provide social protection, but implicit in what each of you are saying is it's actually extraordinarily costly not to do it. So to what extent have you been able to get traction on the notion that the value of what you're averting by making these investments outweighs the value of the actual cost of social protection? And what have been some of the strategies and evidence you've used to make that argument? Thank you.
Start off with Mohammed.
Thank you so much. This is actually a great question, and I think one of the arguments and evidence on the cost of social protection is that the multiplier effect. There are a lot of studies now, especially in Africa, where researchers are kind of trying to estimate for every dollar is given in cash transfer, how much is a return in economic activities in the local markets, and how does that affect in kind of more of kind of the microeconomy aspect of the communities where cash transfer is given. And I think this is a new evidence has been shared where and ranging between for every dollar in a subset in a set of African countries ranging between 1.25 to up to $2 in return in the economy due to the economic activities and that and thinking about it in this way. Another element which also justifies a lot of the cost is the integration. We talked about vertical and horizontal expansion, but there's also the comprehensiveness they mentioned, where you're not just giving cash, but also you're trying to give linkages to labor market and kind of increase. And that touches also to the previous question on like, how can we increase the resilience of households? And the idea of cash plus and how a lot of evidence are emerging now on how cash plus is very effective and more effective in a lot of senses in terms of reducing the cost in the long term, but also increasing the household's resilience in terms of confronting these shocks without the need of consistent need from states and intervention. So I would say there's evidence of multiplier effect and also on cash plus elements that also justify some of these costs as well. Over to the other speakers.
Thanks, and I'll say even, yeah, Lorraine, please, like about.
Is it working? So I can give you more specific evidence. So the FCDO, which is the UK government, which supports ARC, has recently concluded a study just to answer this very question. So Mohammed is very right to say it's for every $1, it's $2 of benefit. So that has been replicated over and over again. ARC Limited is 10 years old, and at the beginning of the study, they did find it was 11 shillings, so it's kept reducing just because of two things: delays in offering the cash transfers or delays in implementation, because the longer it takes for you to provide the cash transfer or the mechanism or the protection, the worse it gets for the individuals, the vulnerable population. So time factor is what is causing it to reduce. Otherwise, the benefit is around 11 shillings. So if we could improve our mechanisms within Africa so that within minutes within a drought occurring or a drought being recorded, at ARC Limited, we pay out within 5 days, but implementation takes a couple of days. If we're able to drill down that window, it could go up to 11 shillings. And then I just also wanted to make a comment. I think I forgot the comment I wanted to make, but it will come to me. I'll find you. Thank you for the question.
Steven, do you have something to add very quickly? We have about one minute, sorry.
Yeah. In addition to the multiplier effect, which I think is a really important, powerful argument, especially for cash transfers, this investment in early action and preemptive measures has been shown to demonstrate, to benefit in terms of saving $3 per every dollar on humanitarian intervention post-shock. So there's definitely a saving there, I think was also what Lorraine was saying. One point I wanted to make again is that it's difficult to put a monetary value on a humanitarian cost, right? So during COVID-19, governments mobilized enormous amounts of money. In South Africa, we spent 500 billion rand, which was 10% of GDP, on social protection responses. And that means that when you need the money, you can find it, right? So the argument that social protection is unaffordable just doesn't hold water. And in fact, the massive response during COVID-19 has also prompted and stimulated the campaign for basic income support, which would be much more expensive than what we have at the moment, but less expensive than what happened during COVID. So I think the campaign is moving towards universal social protection.
Right.
I have remembered my comment. Thank you. So actually, every time we have the conversation, is social protection or is parametric more insurance, the answer is usually Haiti. When you look at how much humanitarians have spent on Haiti and how much they would have spent if it was just on an insurance product, it's not comparable. They've spent billions and billions of dollars and the country is still nowhere near recovery. So if all that money had gone to early warning, anticipatory action, preventive care, post-recovery, disaster relief, you would have spent way less than they have spent right now. Thank you for indulging me.
All right, awesome. I think with that, we're going to have to close it. Just know that these people will be walking around among us. We have a coffee session now. Thank you for staying here the extra 10 minutes. Now it's been reduced to 20 for your coffee. I wanted to thank again Stephen, Bessie and Paul, Mohammed and Lorraine for their presentations. Maybe a big round of applause for them. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.